What if Count Dooku was reborn with all of his memories? Let's start the story during Revenge of the Sith. Do it is the last thing Dooku hears as he looks up at Anakin Skywalker, the strongest Jedi of the current era. He watches his arms motion forward as it all goes black for Dooku. His life has been ended by Anakin. In his last moments, Dooku realizes the truth. He's been a puppet, betrayed all these years by his master Palpatine. All the work he's done, his conversion to the dark side, the war, all to bring a new order to the galaxy, all his effort just to be betrayed. It stays black, Dooku expecting it all to end at any moment. Instead of him losing all consciousness, he wakes up, light fills his eyes as he blinks away the blurriness. His vision clears as he looks around and realizes where he is, the Jedi Temple. He walks around, seeing Jedi Knights and Masters walking around the temple, younglings training and Padawans learning from their masters. He sees people that he knows, however, they are not how he remembers them. Instead, they were much younger. Dooku thought this must be a dream, part of his experience in the afterlife, and decided to live it out. Here he was his 22-year-old self, a Jedi Knight, one of the best in his generation. He spends time training, meditating, believing this is the afterlife. He spends time with his old friends and even his old master Yoda. He waited for this to end, to journey into the next chapter of the afterlife. However, it never ended, and instead, it began to feel more real. And after 1 week in this life, Dooku realized it was real, and instead of dying, he had been reborn as his 22-year-old self. Dooku thinks back on his life and the opportunity that he has now. The reason he turned to the dark side was because of the failures of the Jedi and believing joining the Sith was the only true way to restore peace to the galaxy. But Dooku thinks on what to do now, because in the end, he knows this was the wrong decision. The Sith were not the saviors he thought they would be, but rather betrayed him when the time came. He debated in his mind on what path to take and decided to stick with the Jedi and defeat the Sith and use the Jedi Order to restore peace and order to the galaxy. It would take time, it would not be easy, but he believes he can do it. Dooku is 22 years old now, a Jedi Knight, and at this time is expected to take on an apprentice of his own. He thinks into his past life, who was strong from this era. Qui-Gon wasn't born yet, and his first apprentice was a failure, sadly turning to the dark side. But something clicks in his mind. There is someone he knows, extremely powerful, who isn't in the Jedi Order yet. Instead of going to the younglings' quarters to find a Padawan, he goes to Naboo. He informs the council of this, that he sensed a new Force-sensitive child has been born. When he lands, he goes to the residence of House Palpatine. He introduces himself to Chancellor Palpatine, a young and new father of young Sheev Palpatine. Dooku looks at the boy, only 4 years old, and cannot believe that this is the child that would one day turn into the strongest Sith Lord in 1,000 years. Dooku sits down with Chancellor and explains how his son Sheev is Force sensitive and has the power of the Jedi. Chancellor can't believe it and agrees for Sheev to go back with Dooku to one day become a Jedi of the Order, the first one from Naboo in 1,000 years, and Chancellor was more than proud. Dooku took Palpatine back to the Jedi Temple, where he would become a youngling and begin his training in the Order. Meanwhile, Dooku knew it would take years before he was old enough to become a youngling, but would use this time to plan how he would change the galaxy. What Dooku believed held back the Jedi is that they couldn't get involved in politics. Dooku believed that at the foundation, this needed to change. To do this, the Ruusan Reformation, the laws that changed, the law that was established following the Jedi-Sith War 1,000 years ago, put into law that Jedi were not allowed to become Chancellor. Before this, many of the Chancellors of the Republic were Jedi, and good ones at that. If Dooku could overturn this, and get himself, or rather maybe Palpatine, who he knows is gifted with politics, into the position, then the Jedi could make real change. 10 years passed, and in this time Dooku spent making allies in the Senate he could rely on, as well as waiting for Palpatine to grow up. He was 14 now, and accepted to become Dooku's apprentice, and his training started. Dooku knew that in the original timeline, Palpatine must have had a Sith Master. However, he never talked about him to Dooku, even when he asked. But he knew the Master would make a similar play as Palpatine did in the original timeline, to get someone loyal into the Senate, either a Sith or someone they could control, and start the clone army. Meanwhile, at this time, it was Darth Tenebrous and Darth Plagueis who were the current Sith in the galaxy, prior to when Darth Plagueis betrayed his master. However, the same year that Palpatine became Dooku's apprentice was when Plagueis betrayed Tenebrous, but in this timeline, this did not take place. In the original timeline, the dark side knew Plagueis would eventually find Palpatine, but not in this timeline, so never told Plagueis to kill Tenebrous, and instead they needed each other. A few months later, Tenebrous revealed to Plagueis that he was training a secret apprentice, Darth Venomous, in case Plagueis failed. However, Tenebrous proclaimed to Plagueis that he hadn't failed, and he now didn't have any use for Venomous as an apprentice, and instead he could become a Sith acolyte. Plagueis agreed, and Tenebrous ceased his training further in the dark side, and instead manipulated events so that Venomous could enter politics on his home world of Clactor 7 and enter the system. They knew it would take time, but they would manipulate events so that he would eventually become the senator of Clactor 7, their key to the Republic Senate. Meanwhile, Dooku trained Palpatine for 10 long years as a Jedi Padawan until he became a knight, one of the strongest in his generation. It was weird for Dooku to train Palpatine, and it was hard to get rid of the images of the Sith Lord from his mind. But they were extremely close, and Palpatine was fiercely loyal to Dooku. Throughout his training, Dooku tried to instill into Palpatine about what was wrong with the Jedi, that they had become instruments of politics rather than protectors of peace, that Jedi used to be chancellors of the Republic rather than puppets, that the Senate is a rotting wound at the heart of the Republic, and the Jedi have the power to change it, but they lack the courage. They call it democracy, but it's tyranny by committee. Palpatine aligned himself with these opinions, and Dooku showed him firsthand during his training. Dooku knew Palpatine would have an inherent gift for diplomacy and politics, and leaned on this, knowing that if his plan is for the Jedi to save the galaxy, they would have to get involved in the Senate, and Palpatine was his best chance at this. After Palpatine's training was complete, Dooku was offered a seat on the Jedi Council, and now that Palpatine has been fully trained, Dooku can start making his changes. He's been doing what he could to find the Sith during these years, but to no success, visiting old hideouts and lairs, but they were all empty. He knew he'd need the help of his now apprentice and council. He stood one day in the council chambers and declared he had a matter of extreme importance to discuss. He proclaimed to the council that he believed the Sith have returned. The dark side is rising, subtly, but it has for decades, and the only thing that can explain it is that the Sith are not extinct. The galaxy tips towards chaos, the corruption in the Senate, the unrest in the Outer Rim. The dark side has started blinding the Jedi Council. This cannot be a coincidence. However, the council don't believe him. They simply state that it's not possible, and stand by the fact that they went extinct a millennium ago. Their arrogance was too great, and Dooku knew this would happen. Instead, after the council meeting, he met with Yoda, his master, in private. Dooku decides to take a great risk and reveal everything to Yoda, as he believes this is the only way to convince him. He tells Yoda that he's been reborn, that he lived out his previous life, and after he died, he was given a second chance. Yoda doesn't believe him initially, but they meditate together, and Dooku allows him to see the memories of the future. Yoda can't believe what he's seeing. The future, the Clone War, the Sith Lord Sidious, but what surprises him the most is that Dooku was aligned with the Sith, who was in fact the Jedi Palpatine. They come out of the meditation, and Yoda asks why. They talk for hours about this, the future, that Dooku believed the Sith were the only way to change the galaxy, that the Jedi were arrogant, dogmatic, puppets of the Senate, and refused to act to create change. But Yoda also saw that Dooku was betrayed in his final moments, which was the reason for Dooku helping the Jedi in this timeline. Yoda, seeing Dooku's memories, opened his eyes, and he aligned himself with him. He's realized that the Jedi are too dogmatic, static, and actually need to be the ones making change. And ultimately, Yoda believes that it's his own failures that caused Dooku to turn to the dark side. At the next council meeting, Yoda explains how they're going to search for the Sith, that they will create a strike team, led by Dooku and 3 other Jedi, Kit Fisto, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Sheev Palpatine. The council didn't really understand why, but there was no harm in doing so. This group spends years trying to find the Sith, following secrets and trails that Dooku knew from his past life, but to no success. However, Dooku realizes that they've been looking in the wrong place all along, that he needs to use the fact that the Sith have infiltrated the Senate to his advantage. Palpatine is no longer the Senator of Naboo, and the Sith inside the Senate, so they either must have another Sith or someone who they can fully control in that position. Dooku decides to do a mass comparison of who's well liked and favored in the Senate now compared to the original timeline, and only one name sticks out to Dooku: Senator Noth Veldar, the Senator from Clactor 7, or better known by his other name, Darth Venomous, Sith warrior to Plagueis and Tenebrous. He is the only one in the Chancellor's circle that wasn't present in the original timeline. This cannot be a coincidence. He discusses this with Yoda, and they agree that the strike team should tail him. They follow him for weeks on Coruscant, but there is nothing out of the ordinary. He lives a similar life to every other senator. Dooku starts to lose hope, but they decide to follow him back to Clactor 7. Instead of landing his ship and going into the political offices there, he lands his ship in the outskirts of the main city, all by himself with no security. The strike team find this suspicious and follow him nonetheless. They conceal their presence in the Force as he enters what looks like an abandoned warehouse, but when they get inside, they realize there is so much more: a modern facility and laboratory. Noth Veldar is definitely hiding something. The Jedi hear voices, 3 men, but what shocks them the most is that they can sense the dark side coming from them. They all look at each other and realize this is what they've been looking for. They rush into the main room and all 4 ignite their lightsabers. The Sith respond in an instant. Darth Plagueis, Tenebrous and Venomous ignite their sabers to engage the Jedi head on. Dooku glimpses at their faces, 2 Bith and a Mun, and knows that if one of these was the master of Palpatine, they must be extremely powerful. Dooku takes on Plagueis, Palpatine Tenebrous, while Fistu and Ki-Adi-Mundi fight Venomous. This fight was intense. Lightsabers fling at immense speeds, the first duel between the Jedi and Sith in 1,000 years. Palpatine unleashed everything against Tenebrous, who was measured, attempting to control the flow of the duel and force himself into a position where he could dominate. However, Palpatine didn't make this possible, as he realized what Tenebrous was doing. He lunged piercing attacks, cutting off the Sith and attempting to break his balance. But the Sith's defenses were good, and Palpatine sensed that his biological body was frail, reliant on cyborg enhancements, and would use this to his advantage. Meanwhile, Plagueis and Dooku clashed heavily. Dooku, realizing the true identity of the Mun was Hago Damask, a financier who had come into contact with many times. Plagueis' fighting style was effective, attempting to use the dark side to manipulate Dooku's emotions and thoughts. However, with Dooku's training in the dark side, he was resistant to such attacks. Meanwhile, Fistu and Mundi circled Venomous. The Sith was no longer in an attacking position, simply defending strikes from the 2 Jedi Masters. They were wearing him down, and they backed Venomous into a corner. He attempted to flash Sith lightning at Fisto to make an escape, but the Jedi sensed it and caught it with his lightsaber, and pushed Venomous back with his free hand, as Mundi pounced, thrusting his blade through Venomous's chest before he could block. Palpatine and Tenebrous were locked in a stalemate, their mastery of lightsaber combat equal, but Palpatine decided to use his youth to his advantage. As their blades were locked, Palpatine reached out with a spare hand and grabbed the breathing tube from Tenebrous's face and yanked it, separating it from his body. Tenebrous stepped back as he was being thrust into respiratory failure, and Palpatine captured the moment, severing the power bank located on his back, powering the cybernetics replacements Tenebrous had. The Sith's body began to shut down, combating the respiratory damage and failing enhancements. Palpatine advanced as Tenebrous became slower and slower, finally thrusting his lightsabers through his heart, killing him. Plagueis looked over and realized the duel was lost. Venomous and Tenebrous were dead. He reached out with the Force and chanted a Sith spell under his breath, and the room went black in an instant, as smoke that was immovable and undetectable through the Force encapsulated the room. Plagueis dashed for the exit, cutting down Ki-Adi-Mundi in an instant. As the smoke dissipated, the Jedi looked around. Plagueis was gone. They didn't waste any time. They heard a ship start up and rushed out instantly. They caught a glimpse of a ship taking flight and knew this must be Plagueis making his escape. Palpatine reached to his belt, grabbing one of his tracking devices and hurled it at the ship. Just as the ship ascended, The tracker landed, and moments later, the ship was gone. The Jedi looked at each other. They were successful, defeated 2 of the Sith, and now only had 1 to go. Dooku contacted the Jedi Council and informed them of what happened. Yoda congratulated Dooku and told them they now have the opportunity, and told them they have to use the opportunity to find Plagueis. They mobilized Republic forces and the entire Jedi Council. A few moments later, Palpatine updates them on the tracker, and they finally have a location, Sojourn. In the Council, Republic forces and Jedi Strike Team go immediately. They come out of hyperspace and surround the planet so there is no escape. On the surface, Plagueis thought he had escaped, but realized he must have been followed, as the Republic has formed a blockade around the planet. He looks at his sensors, 3 ships coming to his location. The entire Jedi Council and the Jedi Strike Team land and raid Plagueis' castle. They had to be careful. There were traps and Sith beasts hidden throughout, as Plagueis activated all of his defense mechanisms. However, as they swept the entire house, they couldn't find him, but Plagueis had escaped through his secret cave system into his spare ship. He attempted to make it through the blockade, dodging Republic fire. He thought he had made it as he attempted to activate his hyperspace drive until his ship stopped in its tracks and had been successfully captured by a tractor beam. The Council returned to the main ship to accept Plagueis. They bring his ship in and open the main door as Plagueis was ready to attack, but with the entire Council's power, they stopped him in place and restrained him. They had done it, 2 Sith dead and 1 captured. They bring him back to Coruscant and into the Jedi's prison. Cheers erupted throughout the entire Jedi Order as they did this, and Dooku was proclaimed a hero, having led the strike team to victory. The year is 50 BBY, and Dooku knew that now with the Sith defeated, the Jedi could act. He can begin the second stage of his plan, ridding the Senate of corruption and saving the Jedi Order. He tells Yoda what he wants to do, that the Jedi can no longer be puppets in the Senate, but have to act to make real change. Yoda aligns with Dooku on this, who uses his allies that he's made in the Senate to begin putting forward change. They also work closely with the Chancellor at the time and tell him what they want. They want the Ruusan Reformation overturned, so that Jedi are able to take place in the Senate once again and ascend to the position of Chancellor. The current Chancellor was in his final year of office and was a strong ally of the Jedi and put this motion forward in the Senate. Dooku spoke to the entire Senate, explaining why he thought this change would be necessary. Palpatine spoke next, who was extremely captivating, charismatic, and persuasive. The bill undertook a vote in the Senate, which ultimately was successful, and the Ruusan Reformation was overturned. Following this, Dooku and Palpatine were the Jedi who would now act in the Senate, and Dooku began his campaign to become the next Chancellor in a year's time. And finally, after a long year of campaigning, Dooku convinced the Senate that he would be the next best Chancellor of the Republic, striving for real change to stamp out the corruption and use the Jedi to their full potential. He was successfully voted in as Chancellor, and Dooku sat in his new office. He looked out across Coruscant and thought about everything that had happened. He couldn't really believe it. After decades in this new life, he was successful. He had defeated the Sith and was now in a position where he could make real change for the galaxy and bring about the true order that he'd always wanted. He looked down at the date on his computer and realized the time had come. Someone fairly important has just been born, and he boards his personal ship and sets the next destination for Tatooine.